Chapter 3.7, Part 2. We looked at our marriage contract here with Jean-Baptiste Greuze, and this was more of a common people. This is your middle class, and you see like the wooden boards, you see some chickens in the living room, or I don't know exactly where they are, the dining room. But this is a little less, wealthy or endowed, and then we're starting to get into commentary on the rich from Hogarth. Now he starts to really poke fun. He's sort of using the Rococo style because remember we're sort of like in nowhere land here. This isn't exactly Rococo and this is not exactly neoclassicism, but we're in between those things, if that makes sense. We're frustrated as an artist in the content and the way that he's reacting. He's frustrated with what's going on in the world. So these are social commentary paintings. He did 6 of these. This is the marriage settlement. He did a series called Marriage a la Mode, and they were very popular, and prints were made of these as well. And we're going to look at that, I believe, also, yeah? Okay, so this painting, in this particular one, we see some interaction, some flirting going on here, and later, this is the bride over here. That's supposed to be the groom. Look, he's looking off into the mirror, looking at himself, and he's enjoying his physique and his clothing, and he's really into himself. They're not really united and interacting at all. It's a marriage of convenience, meaning her father, she's probably from a little bit lower down, and her father's got some money, and then his father is over here. He's a lord or a noble person, and he's looking toward his construction project out here, and that's what he's wanting to pay for. So the aristocrat, this is Earl Squander. So you can tell just by the naming of him as Mr. Squander here, Earl Squander, that and he's got gout too on that right foot. Gout, for some reason, is the right toe. Don't ask me why. It has to do with how your blood flows, but that is indicating that he drinks and eats too much. But he has squandered his fortune. He's showing his family tree here, literally a tree with this sort of dead ancestor down here. I've never seen such a family tree as this, but it gives you so much information, a lot of symbolism. But he's lost all his money, but he has the title. And then this fellow's coming in with his daughter, and he's willing to give some dowry like we saw before, but this is a substantial amount with pile of coins here. And so our Earl of Squander can, build his next project. So there's 6 paintings, and they end in quite a grim state. Oh yes, and the dogs are chained together, and the lawyer is flirting with the bride. Later in another segment, the bride and the lawyer run off together. So this is number 6. Was that number 1? It doesn't say. Yeah, okay. So this is number 6, and then Hogarth now has done an etching, engraving of the original painting. So when you say this, that there's a painting and then there's an etching, really they have to do the artwork all over again onto a metal plate. We covered that a little bit in printmaking, but he has to carve out all of these details all over again and then print these out. Now, the social commentary, the backstory, I guess if you want to put it that way, is that people are getting really fed up with the wealthy classes taking all the money. They feel that they're immoral. So there's this real strong sense of social commentary on the immorality of the upper classes. There's cheating. The marriages are not, how you want to say, they're not sacred. They're very much a lot of impropriety, a lot of indulgence, and a lot of affairs and things like that. And in this case, we have a dog that is emaciated, just practically on death's door, eating another dog, which is on the table, which is probably what the people were eating. So things have not gone well. So the lady's dying, and then we have a child here, and he shows the child with a syphilis sore on her cheek that her parents, because of their cheating and so on, philandering, that they've caught Sibelius and somehow given it to the child. So just an absolute mess, and definitely a commentary on that. The chair's fallen over. These prints were mass-produced and distributed, and there were a series of 6. This was one of the series, and these were all mass-produced from the paintings into plates, and then there were a lot of people would buy them. Now, another thing that happened, stealing her ring as well. The dead wife with father stealing her ring. Can you believe it? Look at him. He's stealing the ring right here. Oh, that's just astonishing. So one of the things that happens with Hogarth is these are so immensely popular that people start to do copies and fake. This image is circulated so much and it's well known. So somebody has this in their hot little hand, this print that was very cheap, and they went ahead and engraved and made another one and distributed and sold it. So Hogarth was able to go to court and say, I need to look out for myself because these are getting replicated, and he gets the Hogarth Engraving Act. So it's one of the early copyright legislations that happen. Whew. Okay. We're going to get into neoclassicism. So we're frustrated. Many, many cultures are frustrated with this indulgence and this over-the-top Rococo nonsense and Marie Antoinette and all that good stuff. And so there's a reaction to that. And again, we want to go back to our ideal of Greek and Roman culture. Now, we don't really know with the classical times exactly how just and moral they were. You do hear about the Roman orgy and that kind of stuff. But that's the view at this point. We're looking backward. When things are rough in the world, we tend to look backward. That does happen. Retroism comes into play. In this case, neoclassicism is coming in, a little different than the Renaissance, more to do with famous scenes of that time, that historical mythological stories, and a moral message. So it's kind of interesting, kind of the way I would say that something like Star Trek worked back in the original one in the 60s. Those are morality plays. Even though it's about going to another planet or it's about this, that, and the other, it's really about morality. So we're showing these historical scenes, but it's really about the morality. We're trying to get a return to morality, a return to civic responsibility, and some stability and some balance and order, as well as looking toward democracy, okay? Because we have our democratic roots back in the Roman Senate. So we want to get back to that idea of classicism that appreciates the common citizen. Okay, so, and not just royalty, because royalty is just on the loose. It's gone too far. All right, right here we have the Oath of the Horatii here in the midst of the Salon. And what this is, the Salon is a show held once a year by the Academy. And there's a big segment on page 492. Look it over about the Academy, and Turner, the video on that. That shows you the English Academy, which happens a little bit later. But the first Academy was in France, and it's been the artistic center of Europe. It does remain so for quite a long time. The Impressionists are French and so on. Moving forward. But these sort of schools evolve, and that's what we're a tradition of as a college is in America. I know it sounds kind of like a far stretch from 1785, when really 1648 is the initial date of the French Academy. But the idea that you are studying classic imagery, meaning classicism, meaning Roman and Greek, and you're painting and drawing and sculpting from those statues or plaster casts of those statues. And then also you have nude models, and that's still done at City College, university, what have you, art schools. You still do draw from the nude model, and it's really important and critical to do so, because the human body is incredibly complex and difficult to draw. So once you can draw the human body, you can draw almost anything. So that's one of the aspects of it, but you're also replicating the human body in your artwork at this time. There's a lot of figurative. I mean, look at how many figures we can see here in almost all these paintings. There are landscapes and there are some still lifes, and we'll get into that a little bit, but the idea with the Academy is that you're studying the classics, like you would look at a Rembrandt, you would look at a Michelangelo, you would look at Leonardo, you would look further back into Greece and Rome and sculpt and paint these historic pieces, and then you would come up with your own style and your own painting compositions. But the Oath of the Horatii, we can see how important it was as his pride of place here. And then the other thing I want to say, well, there's so much to talk about here, but I'll kind of keep it to this. The salon style of putting up artwork, you'll hear that sometimes, like, oh, in a gallery, you'll have like a lot of space around each painting. That happens sometimes. But when they're doing salon style, everything is chock-a-block. Each frame is touching the other frame, and sometimes it's even kind of sort of overlapping. It's just crammed in there. So that's salon style, because all these students and all these Academy members want to show their work. So they're cramming it all in here. Okay, and then these pieces are tilted down. You can kind of see that here. So that down here you can look up and see them well enough. And they're huge paintings. I mean, look at the size of the people, and these are just massive, huge paintings. But very important, very few women were in the academies because of the nude male models. There'd be nude female models too, but that was a big no-no. There were some sort of exceptions where they'd have a guy wear sort of like like a loincloth kind of thing. And then they were allowed to draw them. But even then, it was a bit scandalous. So women were excluded for the most part. They could study still life or something like that. But that doesn't put them in the most important hierarchy of the genre, which is here. So history paintings are number one. So Oath of the Horatii is a history painting from an actual event. So portraits come second. Then genre paintings, that's our slice of life. And then landscapes, and then still lifes. Okay, so genre paintings, like we looked at with Rembrandt, with the Saskia sitting on his lap, or some of the other images, you just something that's happening in daily life. Genre painting could even go back into the Northern European, the Bruegel, those kind of paintings where you're seeing fields and people. At harvest time, that kind of thing. But it really comes into the Baroque and Rococo era, and then it goes into Neoclassicism, the genre paintings stay. Okay, difficult for women because you couldn't get training and draw naked guys and that kind of thing. Let's see. The exhibitions in Paris were highly competitive, popular, and they filled the paintings floor to ceiling. Oh, and the placement followed hierarchy. That's right. Forgot to mention that. Okay, so here's our actual The Oath of the Horatii, 1784, oil on canvas. So we're all about oil on canvas for a good 200 years. It goes on for a long time. This is it, oil on canvas. Till acrylic paint is developed and invented in the 1950s, it's oil. Oil, oil, oil. Okay, we have a composition here that's pretty central, if you want to put it that way. Like we have our 1-point perspective. See how our floor is receding back here. We don't really see where it ends, but we have the 1-point perspective. We have clearly defined figures. There's no ornamentation. We're in this basic area here inside of a room where it's just stone walls, and then there's this hearkening to Greek and Roman architecture with our columns. These are very undecorated. And then we have our arches, right? So that's telling us one thing. The men's toga sort of style and the headdress. We have our Roman helmets here. And so we're looking at these 3 sons going off to war. The father is giving them 3 swords, and the female family members are sort of crumpled and soft over here and passive. What else? So linear outlines. These outlines of the each form and just that really I don't know, they really pop from the frames. There's a really harsh outline of his portrait. That is part of neoclassicism. That's part of it. But our subject matter is going to be classicism, and our images are going to be morality plays. So these guys are being heroic and virtuous. The three brothers are going to fight for Rome, and we're back to a sense of morality and virtue. Okay. So serious subject matter, classical figures, stable, balanced composition, and their brothers are vowing allegiance to their father and to Rome. Another piece we're going to look at of this time, 1769, A Still Life. This is an example of what women would be allowed to do, basically, because they aren't going to get into the history painting as much because they're not going to have studied the nude bodies. See, these little pieces like this is a sculpture in progress, but you would have perhaps these types of sculpture. There's a wet cloth on yours. This is wet clay and it's being sculpted. But you would have these replicas of famous works sitting around like we do even now. We have, in the class that I teach drawing in, you have casts of David's head and feet and hands, and then you learn how to draw those famous sculptures. You use those to draw from. So that's very typical. And in Britain, when the English go and do some exploring, they take casts of a lot of things and then they replicate them and bring them back. And you can see those in the Victoria and Albert Museum. That's one place you'll see that. That's a little bit later, though. Okay, so I digress. This is called the attributes of painting, sculpture, and architecture. Remember, those are still our big three from the Renaissance on. Now, the Greco-Roman classicism, that was their focus too. Those were the most important art forms. Then through medieval Europe, we kind of get off into different directions and illuminated manuscripts and things like that. And then we come back to this in the Renaissance, and we're still with this today. At this point in time, 1769, in our neoclassicist era, mouthful, and painting, sculpture, and architecture are important. So we have painting, we have our palette here, we have sculpture here, and then we have architecture. There's some blueprints down there, and a ruler that we still use here, and so this still life is meant to be honoring those things, and it's also looking very unstable, like it's going to fall off a little bit. And she does that intentionally because this is supposed to be hung over a doorway, and you're going to worry about it falling on you. I guess that's part of the it's called an overdoor, and I've never heard of that before reading this in this textbook. Okay, so it's intellectual subject matter to get into the academy. So it's a structured composition, and then the objects seem like they're about to fall. So it's kind of counterintuitive to saying it's structured or stable, and then the objects seem to fall, but it's playing around a little bit with that idea.